Story 1. The Pregnant Target. A few years back, when I was 7 months pregnant with my first child, my husband and I experienced something that still haunts me to this day. It was a cold October night, around 1:30 a.m., and we had just finished watching a late movie together. The house was quiet, our neighborhood peaceful as always, when suddenly we heard it. 3 deliberate, measured knocks at our front door. My husband and I exchanged glances. Who could possibly be visiting at this ungodly hour? We weren't expecting anyone, and our families lived states away. The knocking came again, more insistent this time, followed by what sounded like someone testing our doorbell repeatedly. "Stay here," my husband whispered, grabbing a baseball bat we kept by the bedroom door. I followed behind him anyway, my pregnant belly making stealth impossible. Through our security door's peephole, we could see a woman standing under our porch light. She appeared to be in her 30s, tall and heavy-set, with disheveled hair and clothes that looked like she'd been sleeping rough. But it was her behavior that immediately set off alarm bells. She couldn't stand still, constantly shifting her weight from foot to foot, scratching frantically at her arms until they were red and raw. Her eyes darted everywhere except directly at the door, as if she was surveying our property, cataloging details, memorizing our setup. My husband cracked the door open just enough to speak through the chain lock. "Can I help you?" he asked firmly. "Please," the woman said, her voice shaky but rehearsed, like she'd practiced this speech. "I really need to use your bathroom. It's an emergency. I've been walking for hours and there's nowhere else open this late." The request was strange enough, but what made my skin crawl was how her eyes kept darting past my husband, trying to peer into our house. She was clearly taking inventory, checking for security systems, counting how many people might be inside, looking for valuable items near the entrance. "I'm sorry, but this isn't a public restroom," my husband replied, politely but firmly. "You'll need to find somewhere else." That's when her demeanor changed completely. The shaky, desperate act dropped away, replaced by something cold and calculating. She didn't accept his refusal with embarrassment or understanding like a genuinely desperate person would. Instead, she became aggressive. "Come on, man, just let me in for 5 minutes," she said, now pressing closer to the door. "What's the big deal? I'm not going to hurt anybody." The fact that she felt the need to say she wouldn't hurt us when we hadn't accused her of anything was terrifying. My husband started to close the door, but she suddenly lunged forward, grabbing the outer handle of our security door and yanking on it violently. Thank God we had developed the habit of locking that security door the moment we walked into the house each day. It was just a precaution we'd started after hearing about break-ins in nearby neighborhoods, but it probably saved our lives that night. When the security door wouldn't budge, she completely lost control. She started pounding on it with both fists, screaming at the top of her lungs about how we were fucking assholes and how we owed her for wasting her time. The language was vile, filled with threats about what she was going to do to us. My husband had enough. He unlocked the main door again and shouted through the security door that he was calling the police right now if she didn't leave immediately. The change was instantaneous and chilling. She stopped mid-scream, went completely silent, and just stared at us through the glass. For what felt like an eternity, probably 20 or 30 seconds, she studied us with the focus of a predator sizing up prey. Her eyes moved from my husband's face to mine, then down to my obviously pregnant belly, and I saw something that looked almost like disappointment cross her features. Then, without a word, she turned and walked calmly toward the street. We quickly turned off all our lights and went to the living room window to watch her leave. What we saw confirmed our worst fears. She walked directly to our neighbor's front yard, where two men were waiting for her in the shadows. They huddled together for a few minutes, pointing back at our house and having what looked like an intense discussion. "It was a setup," I whispered to my husband, and he nodded grimly. The whole bathroom story had been a lie. She was either trying to get us to open the door so her accomplices could force their way in, or she was gathering intelligence for a future break-in. They wanted to know our security measures, our daily routines, how many people lived in the house. The most terrifying part was that I had seen this woman before. Not just once, but multiple times over the past few weeks. She'd been in the parking lot at my grocery store, standing near the pharmacy where I picked up my prenatal vitamins, even walking past our house when I was getting the mail. I thought she was just another neighborhood pedestrian, but now I realized she had been stalking me. Being visibly pregnant had made me a target. These criminals probably figured that a pregnant woman and her husband would do anything to avoid violence, would comply with demands to protect the unborn baby. They were counting on our parental instincts to make us vulnerable. After they finally left that night, we immediately called the police and filed a report. The officer who took our statement said they'd had several similar incidents in the area. Teams of people using various pretenses to try to get into homes, often targeting families with small children or pregnant women. We invested in a security system the next day, including cameras and motion sensors. I started varying my daily routines, shopping at different stores and taking different routes home. We never saw that woman again, but for months afterward, every unexpected knock at the door would send my heart racing. The baby is 3 years old now, and we still live in the same house, but we're much more careful. We never answer the door for strangers, especially after dark. And whenever I see a pregnant woman out alone, I think about that night and hope she's being cautious too. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had been home alone that night, or if we hadn't had that security door, or if my husband had been more trusting. The possibilities still keep me awake sometimes. Story 2: The Fake Vacuum Salesman. 2 years ago, I had to relocate to Phoenix for work and ended up staying with my aunt and uncle while I apartment hunted. They'd just bought this beautiful house in a brand new development where all the homes looked like they came from the same architectural template. What I didn't expect was the constant parade of door-to-door salespeople who seemed to view the neighborhood as their personal gold mine. Every single day, someone would come knocking. Water softener companies, solar panel installers, home security systems, overpriced cleaning products, and especially those notorious Kirby vacuum cleaner salesmen who treated no like it was just an opening negotiation position. These sales teams would systematically work every street in the neighborhood from about 9 a.m. until 5 p.m., going house to house like they were conducting a military operation. I guess they figured new homeowners would be easy targets, people who hadn't yet developed the cynicism to immediately shut the door on strangers. My aunt and uncle had warned me about this when I first arrived. "Just ignore them," my uncle said. "Once you let one of those Kirby guys in, they'll stay for 4 hours and won't leave until you buy something or threaten to call the cops." One evening in late June, my aunt and uncle had gone out to celebrate their anniversary at some fancy steakhouse downtown. They'd been looking forward to it all week, had made reservations weeks in advance. So it was just me and my dog Cosmo hanging out at the house. Cosmo was this amazing mixed breed, mostly black lab, but with something else we could never identify. Maybe some kind of retriever or shepherd mix. He was about 70 pounds, stocky and muscular, but honestly the gentlest soul you could imagine. This was a dog who would literally sulk for hours if you spoke harshly to him. His feelings got hurt easily, and he'd give you these heartbreaking puppy dog eyes until you apologized and gave him treats. In the 3 years I'd had him, I'd never seen Cosmo show aggression toward anyone, not other dogs, not strangers, not even the vet during shots. He was more likely to roll over for belly rubs than bark at suspicious behavior. It was around 7:15 p.m., and the sun was just starting to set. Most legitimate salespeople would have packed it up and gone home by now. They typically work normal business hours. That's why I was surprised to hear the doorbell ring, followed by insistent knocking. The front door had this large oval glass window that gave me a clear view of whoever was on the porch. From the kitchen, where I was cleaning up after dinner, I could see a young guy standing there, probably college-aged, maybe 19 or 20. He was dressed professionally in a button-down shirt, tie, and dress pants, carrying what looked like a small briefcase or product catalog. My first instinct was to ignore him completely. It was getting late, I wasn't expecting anyone, and I'd heard enough warnings about pushy salespeople. But because of that damn glass window, he could obviously see me moving around inside. There was no point pretending I wasn't home when he was literally watching me wash dishes. He kept knocking, getting more persistent by the minute. Finally, I gave up and reluctantly walked to the door, with Cosmo trailing behind me. But my dog hung back in the dining room, staying in the shadows where the guy outside couldn't see him. I cracked the door open just a few inches, just enough to talk through the gap while keeping the security chain engaged. "Hi there," the guy said with this overly bright, practiced smile. "I'm Jake from Kirby Home Care Systems. I'm in your neighborhood today offering free carpet cleaning demonstrations with our amazing new vacuum system. I just need about 30 minutes to show you how our patented technology can remove dirt and allergens that other vacuums leave behind." He launched into this whole rehearsed pitch about how revolutionary their product was, how I'd be amazed at what came out of carpets that looked clean, how this was a limited time offer. But there were several things that immediately struck me as wrong. First, it was almost 7:30, way too late for legitimate door-to-door sales. Second, he seemed nervous, kept glancing over his shoulder toward the street. Third, when I told him I was just staying there temporarily and wasn't interested in buying anything, he became surprisingly insistent. "That's okay," he said. "This won't take long, and there's no obligation to buy. I just need to get my demonstration numbers up for my supervisor. You'd actually be doing me a favor." I started to close the door, but that's when everything went wrong. He suddenly stuck his foot in the door frame to prevent me from shutting it, then pressed both hands against the door to keep it open. Wait, he said, no longer smiling. "Just let me come in for a few minutes. I really need to hit my quota today." This was absolutely not normal salesman behavior. Legitimate salespeople don't physically prevent you from closing your door. They take no for an answer and move on to the next house. This guy was crossing serious boundaries, and alarm bells were going off in my head. That's when I heard it, a low, menacing growl coming from somewhere behind me. I turned around in shock to see Cosmo standing in the dining room doorway, and I literally didn't recognize my own dog. His hackles were raised, his lips were pulled back, showing his teeth, and he was making these deep, threatening sounds I'd never heard him make before. This sweet, gentle dog who got upset when I raised my voice was now looking like he was ready to tear someone apart. The transformation was so dramatic that for a second I wondered if this was actually my dog or some other animal that had somehow gotten into the house. The salesman's eyes went wide with terror when he saw Cosmo. His face went pale, and he immediately jerked his hands and foot away from the door like he'd been burned. "Oh shit," he whispered, backing rapidly away from the porch. "You didn't say you had a dog." He turned and literally ran, full sprint, down our walkway to a car that was waiting at the curb. I hadn't noticed it before, but there were 3 other men sitting inside. The moment he jumped in, they peeled out with tires squealing like they were fleeing a crime scene. I stood there for a minute trying to process what had just happened, while Cosmo gradually relaxed and returned to his normal gentle demeanor. It was like watching Dr. Jekyll transform back from Mr. Hyde. When my aunt and uncle got home from dinner, I told them the whole story. They were as disturbed as I was, and the next day they made sure to tell several neighbors what had happened. Looking back, I'm still not 100% sure what those guys were really up to. It's possible they genuinely were overly aggressive Kirby salesmen working late hours and using high-pressure tactics. Kirby teams do travel in groups of 4, with 3 waiting in the car while one does the door-to-door pitch. But several things made me suspicious. The late hour was highly unusual for legitimate sales. The team being all men was strange. Most door-to-door sales teams include women because homeowners, especially women alone, are more comfortable letting mixed gender groups into their houses. Most importantly, his reaction to being told no was completely wrong. He became physically aggressive, blocked my door, and seemed desperate to get inside the house rather than just disappointed about losing a potential sale. Were they really just vacuum salesmen with terrible training and poor judgment? Or were they home invaders using the Kirby sales pitch as a cover story to identify easy targets and get inside houses? I honestly don't know, but Cosmo apparently wasn't taking any chances. Somehow my sweet, gentle dog sensed that something was very wrong about this situation and was ready to protect me regardless of the consequences. I think about that night sometimes, especially when I'm home alone. What if I hadn't had Cosmo with me? What if I'd been more trusting and let the guy inside? Would he have actually demonstrated a vacuum cleaner, or would his 3 friends have joined him once the door was open? I'm just grateful I'll never have to find out. Story 3. The House Hunter Lie. When I was 8 years old, something happened that I still think about 25 years later. It was a Saturday afternoon in November, and I was homesick with a cold, lounging in our living room watching Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets on our old tube TV. I remember the exact scene that was playing when everything started. Harry was down in the chamber talking to Tom Riddle, and the whole atmosphere was dark and creepy. I was completely absorbed in the movie, wrapped up in a blanket on the couch, when suddenly our doorbell rang. It was one of those old-fashioned bells that made a loud, harsh buzzing sound that always startled me. My parents had drilled into me from an early age, never ever open the door when they weren't home. Instead, they taught me a specific protocol. Go to the front window, peek through the curtains carefully, and see who was there before deciding what to do. So I paused the movie, walked over to our big picture window, and pulled back the heavy blue curtains just enough to peek outside. There was a man standing on our front porch that I had never seen before in my life. He wasn't the mailman, wasn't one of our neighbors, wasn't anyone I recognized from around the neighborhood. He was probably in his 40s, average height, wearing jeans and a dark jacket. Nothing about his appearance was particularly memorable or threatening, which in hindsight made him even more dangerous. He looked completely ordinary, like someone you'd pass on the street without giving a second thought. When he noticed me looking through the window, he gave me this big, friendly smile and waved enthusiastically, like we were old friends. Something about that smile felt wrong to me, even as an 8-year-old. It was too practiced, too deliberate, like he'd rehearsed it. I quickly dropped the curtain and went to find my grandmother, who was staying with us while my parents were at work. Grandma Betty was in the kitchen making soup for my cold, humming some old song under her breath. "Grandma," I said, tugging on her apron, "there's a man at the front door and I don't know who he is." The change in her demeanor was immediate and dramatic. Her entire body went rigid and her face became serious in a way that scared me a little. My grandmother had been through some terrible things in her life. She'd been robbed at gunpoint in her own home years earlier, and since then, she didn't take any chances with strangers. She walked straight to the front door without hesitation, but she was smart about it. She didn't unlock anything or even touch the doorknob. Instead, she spoke to the man through the closed, locked door in this firm voice I'd never heard her use before. "What do you want and why are you here?" she demanded. The man's response was smooth and practiced, like he'd given this speech many times before. "Oh, hello there," he said in this friendly, casual tone. "I'm here to look at your house. I'm very interested in buying it. I saw the for sale sign out front and was hoping I could come in and take a look around." My grandmother and I just stared at each other in complete confusion. There was absolutely no for sale sign in our yard. There never had been, at least not in my lifetime. My parents had never mentioned anything about selling our house or moving. We weren't going anywhere. The only time our house had ever been for sale was about 3 years earlier, when my parents had briefly considered relocating for my dad's job. They'd put it on the market for maybe 2 months before deciding to stay. That was ancient history, and there had been no signs or real estate activity since then. "There is no for sale sign," my grandmother said firmly through the door. But instead of being embarrassed or apologetic like someone who had made an honest mistake would be, the man became more insistent. He kept arguing with her, claiming he had definitely seen a sign, saying he was certain our house was on the market. What was really unsettling was his confidence. He didn't sound confused or uncertain. He spoke like he was absolutely sure he was right and we were wrong about our own house. It was this weird gaslighting behavior that made me uncomfortable even as a little kid. "I definitely saw a sign," he insisted. "I'm sure this is the right address. Can I just come in and take a quick look? It'll only take a few minutes." My grandmother was not having any of it. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice getting sharper. "There is no for sale sign here because this house is not for sale. If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police." The magic words. As soon as she mentioned the police, the man went completely silent. The friendly, persistent tone disappeared instantly. I heard his footsteps as he quickly walked away from our front door, and within seconds, we could hear a car door slam and an engine start. We watched through the window as he hurried to his pickup truck and drove away fast, like he was afraid of getting caught. Later that evening, when my parents came home from work, my grandmother told them everything. She described the man in detail and explained the weird story about him claiming our house was for sale. My parents were genuinely disturbed when they heard about it. They confirmed what we already knew. Our house was definitely not for sale. We had no plans to move, and they didn't recognize the man from my grandmother's description. He wasn't anyone from the real estate world, wasn't a neighbor, wasn't someone from my dad's work or my mom's social circle. The whole incident made no sense from any legitimate perspective. My parents immediately called the police to report it, even though the man was long gone. The officer who took the report said they'd been getting similar complaints around the neighborhood. Strangers showing up at houses with various false stories about why they needed to come inside. Even at 8 years old, I understood that something was very wrong about what had happened. The man's story didn't add up, his behavior was strange, and the way he immediately fled when police were mentioned suggested he was up to no good. Looking back as an adult, I'm convinced that man was not interested in buying our house. He was either casing it for a future burglary, looking for an easy target to victimize, or had some other criminal intent. The for sale story was just a pretext to get inside and see what valuables we had, who lived there, what our security was like. The scariest part is thinking about what might have happened if my grandmother hadn't been there that day. What if I had been completely alone and, being a trusting 8-year-old, had believed his friendly story and opened the door? I don't even want to imagine what could have gone wrong. My grandmother probably saved me from something terrible that day. Her life experiences had taught her not to trust strangers with sob stories, and her quick thinking and firm boundaries protected both of us. Even now, 25 years later, I'm very cautious about answering the door for people I don't know. And whenever I hear about children being home alone, I think about that day and hope their parents have taught them the same lessons mine did. Some friendly smiles hide very dark intentions.